All right, so I'm finally getting around to checking out my front drive shaft. For those of you that followed my overland trip, about 2 months before it ended, I took this off, going through the process of elimination, trying to figure out what a grinding noise was in the front end. And after I took this off, that grinding noise went away. So it's either in the drive shaft or in the axle housing. A lot of people pointed out that it probably is in the drive shaft, and more than likely you're right. It didn't stop me from going anywhere when I was in two-wheel drive, but I really wasn't doing anything that was all that rigorous at that point. But I might get a little bit of snow here in North Carolina or go somewhere where there is snow, so I want to get this fixed. It's been sitting on my garage floor for 2 months now, and it's time to get it done. So I don't know if you can hear this in the microphone, but I think this is probably most of the problem. You can hear that the double cardan joint is completely dry. When I put it in this motion, I've got a flat spot somewhere. It could still be the cardan joint, but it also could be a flat spotted U-joint. Either way, this needs to be replaced. I bought this about 2.5 years ago. It's been through a lot of mud, and I've forded a lot of rivers and creeks on my trip. So I'm pretty sure that there's a couple of bad parts in this. The spline is in really good shape. All the coating is still on the spline. I had this completely apart, and there's no issues there. And then on the other U-joint, I took the caps off. All the needle bearings look good. Everything feels good and moves good. So I'm not going to touch that. And that's easy to replace on its own later on. I do have another drive shaft that I rebuilt that was originally on this. So I decided not to use it. So I'm going to take off the components from that one and put them on this one, especially since the cardan joint for this XJ99 is about $90 to $100. So I'm going to reuse that one since it was never used. Make sure that there's Spicer U-joints on that one as well, and if not, order those. So I'll get this fixed in the next few days, and I'll try to film at least a little bit of that. I'm not going to do a how-to. There's so many videos out there on how to replace U-joints. I don't need to do one of those. But also, I think the axle housing may be an issue. I have a locker in the front, and when I turn the wheel, the way it's supposed to work is I get a nice clicking sound. But around the same time that my front end started grinding, that clicking sound started going away, and I didn't hear it when I was turning. And when I turn hard, I get chirping, where I really didn't get that before. So I'm really interested in finding out if there is a problem with my locker, if I chipped or lost a tooth or something. So I need to replace the fluid anyway. It's long overdue. So now's a good time to do that. I need to make sure that the whole thing looks good. I did put the vehicle in four-wheel drive, even though I've got the front drive shaft out. I don't hear anything weird out of the transfer case, so I seriously doubt that that's the problem. But what you just heard in here, more than likely, like people commented on that one video where I talked about this issue when I took it off, it is probably this. But I am curious as to what's inside that axle housing. So let's crack that open and take a look. So the oil, you know, it smells pretty bad. Should have been replaced a long time ago. It's not gritty. There's nothing in there, so if there's anything wrong, it's got to be just a chipped tooth or something, but I've got no filings or anything in there, so that's a good sign. Anyway. Everything looks fairly good. Got to jack up one side of this, though, and move the tires. everything seems to be like it should. These clear spots here from where I touched it, trying to feel, see if there's anything that seems out of place, but from what I can tell, everything seems to be working properly in both directions. It's nice and smooth, but I'm going to go ahead and hit this with brake cleaner, clean it all out as much as I can, take a magnet, go through all the oil, make sure there's no chips or anything that might have slipped through, and maybe that'll tell me if there's another problem. But from as far as I can tell, everything is okay, and all the gearing looks good in the main gear and in the back there, so maybe it's just in my mind. I'll replace the cardan joint, U-joints, and give this a whirl and see if that fixes the problem. Fast forward a couple of days and I'm finally getting back around to putting this back together. And I thought the play between the axle spinning and the drive shaft spinning was maybe in the yoke, but now I notice that if you look at that pin up there where the spring is, as I turn this back and forth, there's a lot of play in those holes. And as I can look inside a little bit, I'm starting to wonder if those holes aren't ovaling out. And I would not be surprised if they are. That seems like a lot of play. I don't remember that much being in there a couple of years ago when I installed this. So I don't know if anybody can comment on that, but that is definitely something that I'm looking at. I'm going to put this back together the way that it is anyway, but now I know what that play is. I thought maybe it was in the yoke, but it's actually not. So I just jacked up the other wheel, make sure everything still works properly after I've cleaned this out. Cleaned off the face of the axle housing so that the gasket sealer will stick nice, and I'm going to do the same thing to the cover and put this back together. Alright, so I've got gasket sealer around the edge. Sometimes you got to do what you can to salvage what little's left of the RTV. This was solid all the way up to here, even though I had it covered. So this stuff was actually pretty good, so I used all of that, put a nice layer there. And since I had the time, I just put a really thin layer on the axle housing face itself, just to butter back it, make sure it's got a good bond. I don't want this thing leaking on me in the future. Now I'll put this all back together and then add my fluid. Alright, so here is a quick tip on how to refill your gear oil without making a complete mess. And I just got a dollar store turkey baster, took the rubber top off of this. I use it for other things as well. And just shove the end into the hole. It actually is flexible enough that I can bend it up over the tie rod assembly bar here, and it doesn't crack. And then it's an easy way that you can actually tilt your container and fill your gear oil without making a mess, not having to use a transfer system or anything like that, or even plastic tubing. Plastic tubing is probably the next best option. Just be careful when it gets to the level here, because anything that's in this tube obviously is going to spill out once you fill up your axle housing area. And I have a bucket underneath here to catch any drips. So just an easy way to do this without having to make a complete mess. Alright, so now that I have the axle cover back on, I can drive that thing around again. But I've moved on to disassembling the old drive shaft, which I've already done. It's a lot more complicated than it should have been. It's a really easy job, but sometimes things just don't go as planned, like pushing through the cap too far to one side and then having to squeeze it back through, and then also taking one of my caps and dropping it on the floor, so that went everywhere, all the needle bearings. I didn't even bother trying to put those back together. what's done is done. I do have Moog U-joints on there though, so I'm gonna have to go ahead and order Dana Life joints. So I'm gonna have to wait around for that. But I also was able to recover the double cardan, got the spring in there, so I'm good on that. And now I just need to take apart the other one. Since I've already got all my tools out, I might as well go ahead and do that. So that's what I'm gonna do now. All right, so that went about as well as I could expect. No major complaints, came apart pretty easily. As you can see, the double cardan joint, the ball just kind of rolls around in there. It is as dry as a bone, and the spring inside even busted into two pieces. This is the way that it should look, and I'm going to pack more grease in there before I assemble this one when I do. The U-joints didn't look too bad, but they didn't look great. Well, this one didn't anyway. One of these right there, you can see it's got brown grease inside of it, so it definitely got water inside. For that reason, I'm not going to bother with that one. This one here looks pretty good and seems to travel pretty good, so I'm going to go ahead and use this as a backup in case I need one on the trail, and just install the new ones like I mentioned earlier. So now I just need to clean up my mess and put everything away, order the parts, and call it a day. All right, so it's been a week, maybe longer. It was hard to get motivated to do this thing again. I was working on some other stuff, but if I don't have to work under pressure, it takes a lot longer for me to do things. My Spicer U-joints came in, the Life ones. I've got this all cleaned out. I still need to pack some grease inside the cardan joint and inside the mating area, but I'm ready to finally work on it, so let's get this done. All right, so I didn't even show a full time elapse on that because it was a comedy of errors. Things did not go according to plan, and they normally don't when I do jobs like this. But even though I had the right sequence, I ended up doing it more than once. One reason was I had some needle bearings fall in on me, so that was a lot of fun. I had to dig those out, take apart the whole thing, and get it sorted out. So luckily I didn't lose anything, and they're all there. Now everything moves as it should. It is back together. It's kind of late tonight, so I am going to wait till tomorrow morning, put this back in, and make sure everything operates as it should. So crossing my fingers that it does. All right, so it's the next day. I got the drive shaft on the Jeep. Now I need to go take it for a test drive. All right, so I just got back from taking it out on the road. I had it up to about 70 miles an hour, and it sounds great. I even ran near some areas where I could hear it bounce back off of a fence or a concrete barrier or something and see if there was any noise from that, and it sounds really good. I went ahead and threw it in four-wheel drive to test that out, and just like I was experiencing on my last month before I removed the drive shaft, when I turn it in four-wheel drive with that locker in there, it does not sound good, and it sounds like it's struggling to disconnect and let go so that my wheels can slip when I'm turning. And I think I've got a bigger issue, and I don't know if it comes down to that little bit of play that I was showing earlier in the video, or if it's just something else, but it is definitely not operating the way that it should, or I don't think so. I'm definitely going to have to take this out on some four-wheel drive trails and see if it operates the way that it should. But more than likely, I am going to be putting in another locker within the year, is my guess. Because if this thing blows out, I'm going to have to get out of wherever I am in two-wheel drive and probably take off the drive shaft, maybe even empty out the housing. I'm not sure how that's all going to work, but it would be definitely interesting if I was out there on my own somewhere remote. For that reason, I probably will install another one. I have an Aussie locker in there now, and it's worked great up until recently, so I don't know exactly what it could be. I just looked at it, and everything seems to be fine. I'll decide that as I go, but a new locker is probably in my future. Not something I really wanted to pay for and install, but it is what it is, and sometimes you just got to go with it. So anyway, the drive shaft issue is done. That took care of at least my grinding noise, so whoever called that, I think there were a couple of you, you were right about that, and thanks for all the feedback. So that's it for now. I'm not going to worry about the locker until I take it out on the trails and see what happens, but for now, that's it. Thank you for watching. Please leave your comments below if you have any. Hit the like or dislike button, and I will talk to you next time.